Thanks so much. Good morning. Honestly, it's really not that scary in the front. I feel like we're in high school and everyone's kind of sitting in the back, but so please come forward. I'm just going to jump right in. So let me take you back to kind of a moment. Anybody know where this is? Guesses? This is Los Angeles. I get guesses, when I show this all over the world, I get guesses like Denver and stuff because people don't quite realize if they're not from the area that there's mountains and that it can be this clear because, you know, it's a little bit dated. If you were there last night, you heard Ed Begley Jr. say, the air in LA is not what it used to be, but we kind of picture it as smoggy. But I want to take you back to a moment where I think it was probably the cleanest day in modern history in LA, and it was clean air around the world. We had a kind of day, a week, where we saw this before and after very suddenly in places like Milan, in places like Delhi, in China. Now, when was this? Right. Second week of April, 2020. And I'm not suggesting now that the way we get to clean air is to shut down the global economy, but we got this vision. And I think in the sustainability and environmental world, sometimes we do tend to talk about the dangers, about what's coming from climate. We talk about what's kind of nasty. And we forget in a way to paint a picture of where we're headed. That if we get to this kind of net zero world that I believe we will, where the grid is run mainly on renewables, we're driving mostly EVs, and by 2050 or so, if that's where we get, this is the air. This is the quality of life that we can have. And I like to imagine that the communities that are supporting these cities are filled with people having enough, earning a living wage, that we're dealing with the social and environmental issues in our society in a really, I think, robust and just way. Now, I've chosen to spend my career working on how does the business community contribute to a world like this? How do we build a thriving future? And I know there's kind of different views of business. If there's folks in the room that come from the environmental community, NGOs, there can be this attitude, especially when I talk to kind of younger people, that business and industry are kind of eating up the world. They're destroying things. But my life really has been spent for the last 25 years on the idea that, like it or not, we need business to build a thriving world. And the reality is both these things could be true. We can have multiple things that are true at once. We're not going to get to a thriving world without the scale, the tools, the capital, and the skills of business. So it is important whether business is engaged on sustainability, and that makes kind of what's happened in the last couple of years, I think, really critical for all of us. And so I get a lot of questions in this field. I've been working with business and with sustainability people for a very long time. And kind of the topic over the last year or two has been fairly logically, is corporate sustainability over? And we hope the answer is no. My short answer is no. It's kind of much more complicated than that. But you could be forgiven for thinking perhaps that was the case. Early last year, you started to see all these headlines, the covers of magazines saying, companies are done. They're breaking their promises. They're not going to hit their carbon goals. The reality has been much more nuanced than that. And we started to actually gather data last fall. You saw big consulting firms kind of surveying actual CEOs and saying, how do you feel about this? Where are we headed? Last fall, Accenture did this study, and they asked CEOs around the world, basically, are you continuing with your sustainability efforts? 99% said yes, we're maintaining. Now, anything 99 in a survey is a little bit sketchy, but let's just say it's a lot, right? But the other numbers here are really interesting to me. So I've spent 25 years, one of my mentors, Hunter Lovin's in the room, has spent a little bit longer making this business case for sustainability. And 88% of global CEOs now say that the business case is better than it was 5 years ago. That's progress, right? But half the CEOs say they don't really know how to communicate about this. The other half are lying. Nobody knows how to talk about this right now. That's kind of the problem. But we're starting to see, I think, a little bit of a backlash to the backlash. So a couple months ago, there was a really interesting moment. The Financial Times reported that the CEO of Nestle had, in a kind of global, virtual talk to his employees, so it was going to be public, he knew that. He said, look, we've been not talking about sustainability. And he named very specifically the administration in the US. It had made everyone quiet. But he said, we haven't really stopped the work that we're doing. We haven't really stepped back, so we need to be talking about it more. So I like to remind people that the anti-ESG movement, the backlash against corporate sustainability, there's not a backlash unless you're winning, unless you're doing something. There's no backlash if you have no impact. So it was a sign that things were changing. And I'd like to believe, and I think that we're starting to see the evidence that in essence, corporate sustainability did win. It won some very important battles. It got on the agenda. When I started in this, most large companies weren't talking about it. They didn't have sustainability reports. Now there really isn't a large company in the world that doesn't have some kind of statement and some kind of report, and most have carbon goals, most have energy goals, and there's a little bit of pulling back going on. There's really weird mixed signals at times, but a bunch of banks pulled out of these organizations where they had committed to be net zero by 2050, but the capital's still flowing, the money's still going to clean tech, so it doesn't really matter in a way like how much they're talking about it if the money's still flowing. And my kind of logic to people in sustainability and the environment is to kind of remind us that the logic for action, for companies to take action on climate in particular, but sustainability in general, is still very, very strong. And I kind of write this up, and I have a class online on LinkedIn. It's free, so that's not like pushing anything on you. It's a free class, where I kind of break this into 3 buckets of we need to be acting, we have to, and we want to. Now, the need to is kind of just existential problems. These sets of logic is how we keep the movement going and how we get buy-in from executives that maybe are skeptical or a little afraid to talk right now. So the existential problems we face are the need to. We need to for our own survival and thriving. And for example, biodiversity is still under threat. Swiss Re, the reinsurance company, has said that 55% of global GDP is dependent on high-functioning biodiversity. I don't really understand what the other 45% is. I think it all is, but they're kind of probably picking specific sectors. And then, of course, we have climate. Climate change, to me, is kind of the final exam for humanity. I'm not going to get into the science. There's plenty of people here that could do that. But I'll just say that the reason these existential things are still such a driving force for business is that, there's this myth, I think, in the kind of backlash against business that business was talking about these things because of pressure, because of progressive goals or some liberal agenda. But in reality, business was starting to talk about and work on climate change because there is climate change, because the problem is real. And it's affecting business, it's affecting their supply chain, it's costing them money. So we're talking about it because it's real. And at a very fundamental level, we hit this point a number of years ago, the cost of inaction on climate is in the trillions of dollars, much more than the cost of action. And that's true at the economy level, but at the company level. And I'll come back to some of the statistics that really show you how fast we're moving against carbon. The have to part of this equation is just we have to because there's pressure, there's stakeholders, there's customers, there's young people, there's people asking questions, but there's just this kind of mega force that keeps growing that is transparency. Is the demand to know everything about a business and what it's doing and its footprint. And there's a bunch of laws, and this is part of the regulatory pressure. There's kind of less legal pressure, like something called the clean label movement in consumer products, where it's all of us going and shopping and wanting to know what's in everything and wanting to recognize the ingredients. That's pressuring companies to be more sustainable about their supply chains. But these regulatory pressures are very real. And it's happening all over the world. There's the European directive, and there's ups and downs of how many companies are covered, but fundamentally, large multinationals have to talk about this stuff. And it's happening regionally. There's California laws. There's a law in Germany called the German Supply Chain Accountability Act, which I only showed just to make fun of the German language because it's one word, and it just makes me laugh, and I will not try to say it. I married into a German family, and I'm now the only person, and my kids have studied it. I'm the only one who doesn't speak it. This is about the only German word I know. But it's happening everywhere. The pressure is coming from everywhere. And there's this kind of soup of acronyms that companies are swimming in. And it's annoying, and it's expensive, it seems, at times. But non-financial reporting, as it's called, is still a fraction of financial reporting. Right? There's thousands of people in large companies working in the CFO's office, working on financial reporting. This is still growing and evolving and getting clearer. There's pressure from companies on each other, and that doesn't seem to have changed much. MIT did a kind of supply chain study and just, again, asked companies, are you still pressuring your suppliers? And in essence, 3/4 said there were no change in their commitments, and actually 12% were increasing them. Some percentage was decreasing, but fundamentally still moving. It's all still moving. Now, I don't want to overstate everything I just said because what's been happening in business in the US in particular is called green hushing, as opposed to greenwashing, thank you. And it is companies going very quiet, and that does have an impact, there's no doubt. But the conversation inside companies with sustainability officers has been fundamentally, well, how do we keep this moving? And there's been this kind of phrase for the last year, like, how do we get back to return on investment? And I only find that amusing because I don't know what that means to go back to ROI. We've been making the return on investment case for a very long time. And just for the Gen X people in the room, if you know who this is, great. If you don't, I'm sorry. But we've been doing this for a long time, and so it's kind of odd to me. I mean, I wrote my first book, Green to Gold. It's going to be out 20 years this fall. Yeah. I love, as you get older, you just get applause for having been around a really long time. And this book came out the same day as my second son, so he is going to be 20 this fall. That alone freaks me out. So I have like a 6'3" reminder every day of like how long I've been doing this now. And we made this case very simply that there's value to be had in being sustainable and seeing your business through an environmental lens. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's kind of 4 big buckets of reducing the downsides of cost and risk and driving the upside. Revenues, building brand value. And I could give you tons of examples of companies that have created or destroyed billions of dollars in value through an environmental lens. I mean, the short story is that this is fundamentally about innovation. Like, what drives innovation? Constraints, new needs, customer demands, and sustainability is a huge driver of what companies need to do going forward. And I could give you kind of endless examples of how much money companies have made. And there's little studies all the time. BCG did one that just said a vast majority of companies are capturing value they can measure from decarbonization. But I think we rely in business on return on investment, on these tools to say, is this a good investment? And I think those tools are kind of broken. And we pretend that they're used in this very specific way. We pretend in a way that all executives make decisions based just on numbers. But here's the secret of kind of behavioral psychology and behavioral economics. Nobody makes decisions just on numbers. CEOs are no different. We make decisions on gut often, and then we look for data that supplies it. And I can prove that companies spend tons of money on things without knowing the exact return all the time. Because right now we're in this grand experiment of spending hundreds of billions of dollars on AI, and companies do not know the return. They don't yet. And it's even worse than that. Studies keep coming out lately that show that the vast majority of initiatives, companies can't actually say. They don't know if it's delivered the return. Now, I want you to imagine if companies all said, hey, you know those sustainability things we do, decarbonization or supply chain, only 25% of them pay back, we don't know. There would be cover stories in every business press, and sustainability would be talked about as this anti-business thing, like it always is. This is the AI world that we're in. And my point is that there's things we do in business that evolve into just the natural course of business, the things we always do. Things like safety. This is a real pre-AI picture. There's something called #SafetyFails. You can go find really some of the funniest pictures you've ever seen. People fixing electronics like in water, in pools, and just really dumb. But safety became something that companies do. And it costs more money up front. Of course it does, right? Safety, quality, lean manufacturing. These became disciplines. People get degrees, right? There's millions and millions of people working in these fields, and they were considered extra and expensive if you go back 50, 100 years. Not doing child labor was considered expensive 100 years ago. Companies fought it, right? There's things that we accept as how we do business. And I believe sustainability, even in the fits and starts right now, is very much on that path and is in many ways already in there, in that bucket of things we just do. Now, the more kind of existential question that has been asked over the last kind of year or two in this world for the people that have been working in this and working for this change is just, did it fail? Did this whole sustainability thing fail? And I kind of get the kind of urge to conclude that, because if you look at the metrics, carbon emissions, biodiversity loss, inequality, they're still getting worse, right? And so you can say, oh, none of this worked, but those two things are not the same. And in fact, the world is much more complicated. You can be winning and losing. We are winning and getting this on the agenda. We are winning in companies decarbonizing. We're just not going fast enough yet. We're getting there. We're at some very important tipping points, but we are still seeing emissions rise, and we're getting better at this. And both can be true, and that is really hard. And I want to just kind of, it's not a full answer to did this whole movement fail or succeed, but I want to just show you some really big macro data and kind of, I hope, convey how much is changing in the world of clean energy. So I want to just look at electricity generation. And within the OECD countries, that's the group of 32 or so countries that are mostly the richer countries. And so this is the place that has had the capital, that has had the wherewithal. And I want to go back like 40 years. And I want to show you in each kind of group of 5 years how much energy was added to the grid. This is how much electricity was generated. This isn't just capacity, this is terawatt hours. Now, you would be forgiven for not knowing what a terawatt hour is. It's a lot. 4,000 terawatt hours is about the electricity use of the United States. So in, for example, 1985 to 1990, we added 1,200 terawatt hours, and it was almost entirely coal, gas, and nuclear. Makes sense, right? This is 40 years ago. And over the course of 20 years, the richest countries in the world added about a US worth of electricity generation. Great. But let me show you the next 20 years. It's a very different picture, okay? You start to see that you will hear people say, hey, the world still needs fossil fuels, it's still 70, 80% of energy, and that is true, but that is not quite the right comparison, and it's actually comparing apples and oranges. Because renewable energy does one thing so far. It replaces electricity from other sources. It's not competing with all sources of energy yet, okay? So over the time where the countries that have had the lead time and the capital to do it, they've shut down coal. It is, in fact, displacing coal at a very rapid rate. It's even started to displace gas. You can see the growth of gas in gray. That was fracking, and that was a huge boom. But look in the last 5 years, wind and solar. And in fact, this is through 24. As the numbers are coming out now for 25, it's even more. Basically, in 2025, the world's added additional electricity capacity was all clean. It was fundamentally satisfied by wind, solar, and storage, and a little bit of nuclear. Places built some coal, but they also shut it down. So in essence, we're already there. We're at the point where we're only building fundamentally clean stuff. And if you like your charts in kind of stacked bars to 100%, this is the same data, just so you can kind of see how big wind and solar have been in the last 5 or 6 years. So this is how you get headlines like, in 1990, the UK was getting something like 80% of its electricity from coal, and now it's zero. Done. It's gone. Or the International Energy Agency saying, this is happening, this is unstoppable. Even in the US, which, let's be honest, has a pretty aggressive anti-climate, anti-renewable energy philosophy at the federal level, it's still expected that almost all the new energy put on the grid is going to be renewables this year. It's just economic. And so here's where we go next. So we're replacing electricity with clean. Now we're starting to replace mobile energy or transportation with clean as well. And we're plugging in more and more of the world. Globally, kind of an exponential curve, 23, 24% of new cars globally in 24 were EVs. Now let me show you China. Almost 50% of new cars, it's over 50 now. Over 50% of new cars in China are EVs. And you can say, well, that's fine, that's small, whatever. Well, this is a new statistic from just a few months ago. It just came out in December. Over half the heavy trucks in China are EVs of the new sales. Yes, applause for that. That's a pretty big change. So I've heard from people for many years, China isn't doing anything. I've heard that for years, and I can't even describe how wrong that is. Like, it's just vast misinformation. They control the value chain for a huge portion of the clean economy. That has its pros and cons for sure, but they are building it. They're not just selling it, they're building it themselves. They have installed more capacity than the rest of the world combined, year after year. So making this case to business internally, making it to executives is, I think, broader than just, hey, there's good return on investment. There's also this larger story that the world is moving. Don't fall behind. There are two grand technological shifts going on right now, the clean economy and AI. And they're actually interrelated in many ways, because AI is only powered by electricity. China's built way more electricity than the rest of the world as well. They are powering AI by having the source of what drives AI compute, which is actually electricity. And the transition is here. You can't miss this. So I'm encouraging people and companies to kind of keep pushing. It's tough. It is really hard to be someone advocating within organizations for this right now, in the US in particular. But this is how we kind of keep speed and scale. And we need to build something that I've talked about as a net positive business. This is came from a book that a co-author and I wrote a few years ago. A net positive business is one that helps solve the world's problems. That's how it grows in profits. It doesn't make them worse. It's solving them. And this is a question that my co-author Paul Pullman, who ran Unilever, we posed to the world, is the world better off because your business is in it? And I find that people kind of pause there. And I find myself in kind of older middle age now going, is the world better off because I'm in it? These are the kinds of profound questions that I think keep us going and force some deep thought about our lives. And I can't point to any company that's net positive. Nobody is yet. The system isn't there. But you have parts of the story being written. IKEA generates more energy than it needs on its stores from renewables. It is climate positive in its energy and electricity. It's selling solar as well. It's creating this multiplier. Walmart and Kering and others have set net positive goals. We're going to save 50 million acres of land. We're going to be net positive in biodiversity. That's kind of the phrase. And we need a different kind of leader. Ajay Banga ran MasterCard. He's now the head of the World Bank. He's talked about decency, humanity in leadership and in business. We need these kinds of leaders to be net positive, ones that have humanity and purpose and empathy, and most importantly, have courage. I think courage is severely lacking in the US right now in our leadership, standing up for the things that we know need to happen, fighting things that I think are not healthy for business or the body politic. And so I just want to end with a few minutes on courage. And there's a TEDx talk I did on courage that's a little longer than this that you can go look up. Now, we picture courage, we think of it as the man in front of the tank. And that is a form of courage, and we know it when we see it. But in reality, courage more day to day is this. It's showing up together, right? We just saw this in Hungary, right? It's amazing. I really did not think that could happen. I really didn't. But people can come together and change things. And we're not going to get it from the leaders, really. We can push them, but we have to show up. And so the way to create this kind of courage, I think, is in some ways simple sounding. It is practice. It is doing it in your everyday life. It is kind of a muscle you need to use. It means having conversations that maybe are tough with peers, with your father-in-law, with your boss, whatever it is. Have some tough conversations about what needs to happen. Know that your actions matter. We heard that last night. There's always that question in environmentalism about, does what you do matters? And I don't know, there's 8 billion of us. So no individual matters if you're going to be technical about it, but we all do, right? It's what adds up. You have to come from a place of truth, right? That we know what we're doing matters, that we need the environment, that we need the planet, that we need a stable climate for us to thrive. These are just facts. It is about taking the long view, that we are building something. How many people have been to this church in Barcelona? It's La Sagrada Familia. I've been there over the course of now 30, 40 years of adult life and find it amazing because it's being built for 100 years. They just finished kind of they just got to the top point. They built the tallest spire, but it's still being built. People have come and gone in their entire lives doing work on this building. And I always think, we're never going to see the end, right? I hope to make it to 2050. I should be there, and I want to see if we get to net zero, but I'm not making it to 2100. My kids might. Surprisingly, they'll be in their 90s to 100, We are building something larger, solving these problems. And so just think you are putting your brick in a taller spire. And finally, we have to go together. Again, it is a collective thing. It is collective courage that is the easiest to find. To solve the problems together, to say what is standing in our way. In a business, if we're trying to do something more sustainable, what's causing the problem? What do we need to do to fix it? And I want to end with some thoughts from, I think, inspiration to many, many people. And I don't know if you saw, but Netflix has been doing this thing where they interview people that are late in their life and are saving the release of the interview until they die. And Jane Goodall was the first one that they released. And in this video, she talks about hope. And if you don't have hope, you become apathetic. You do nothing. And she said, everyone has a role to play. Every single day you live, you are making choices. you are making a difference. So I ask you, how are you going to be net positive? And the answer to that question from all of us is going to save the world. Thank you very much.